Well, hello everyone. Getting ready to go to Porkfest, but I wanted to do another installment of the Anarchist Handbook. And as you might recall from the last video where we did the introduction, or chapter 1, which I called the preface, we're now on chapters 2 and 3. And just a bit of a heads up, chapter 3 is frickin' long. I'll just say right now it's frickin' long. We're going to deal with chapter 2. These are separate essays. And let's just deal with 2 first. So this is William Godwin, who I've never heard of, from 1793. And the essay, or at least part of it, is from Enquiry Concerning Political Justice and Its Influence on Morals and Happiness. Now I'm going to read the little summary that Michael Malice gives. Widely regarded as the first anarchist in modern times, the British William Godwin's Enquiry was one of the most influential political tracts of his era. His devastating critique of social contract theory holds just as true today. As Godwin demonstrates, the social contract is one of those ideas that would come off as incoherent and deranged if one heard them for the first time as an adult. It is an alleged unwritten contract that presumes both consent, despite none having been given, even in the face of explicit lack of consent, and contains no specific terms, a key element of any contract. Though the social contract is often posited as the origin of a just government, no government in history has ever so much as pretended to have come about as a result of it. And so true. And as a point of interest, though, that's kind of the thought experiment that Robert Nozick did in Anarchy, State, and Utopia, to try to show that a micro-state, or mini-state, however he called it, could arise consensually and without violating rights. I don't think he did so, but that was what he was setting out to do. So we're just going to read a few quotes from this. It's a short little essay. Little will be gained for the cause of equality and justice if our ancestors, at the first institution of government, had a right indeed of choosing the system of regulations under which they thought proper to live, but at the same time could barter away the understandings and independence of all that came after them to the latest posterity. These older writings are sometimes very stilted to our ears, but basically saying even if our ancestors did have the right to negotiate amongst themselves and they came to a voluntary agreement as a state, they don't have the right to then bequeath that down to their progeny. And says, upon this hypothesis, every government that is quietly submitted to is a lawful government, whether it be the usurpation of Cromwell or the tyranny of Caligula. Acquiescence is frequently nothing more than a choice on the part of the individual of what he deems the least evil. Right? Acquiescence isn't consent, in other words. Locke we revere today, but I think we revere him a bit too much. He was a product of his time, and there are holes in some of his theory. Locke, the great champion of the doctrine of an original contract, has been aware of this difficulty, and therefore observes that a tacit consent, kiss my ass. Well, kiss my ass isn't in here. That was my addition. A tacit consent indeed obliges a man to obey the laws of any government, as long as he has any possessions or enjoyment of any part of the dominions of that government. God, kiss my ass. But nothing can make a man a member of the Commonwealth but his actually entering into it by a positive engagement and express promise and compact. And then Godwin says, a singular distinction. I like the way the word singular used to be used in the past. It's very old-fashioned. Implying upon the face of it that an acquiescence such as just been described is sufficient to render a man amenable to the penal regulations of a society, but that his own consent is necessary to entitle him to the privileges of a citizen. Quite the quandary there, Mr. Locke. It says, the social contract, considered as the foundation of civil government, requires of me more than this. I am not only obliged to consent to all the laws that are actually upon record, but to all the ones that shall hereafter be made. Right. You have to have a crystal ball. So, in conclusion, the essay says, of course, I've skipped around. Lastly, if government be founded in the consent of the people, it can have no power over any individual by whom that consent is refused. I don't consent. If tacit consent be not sufficient, still less can I be deemed to have consented to a measure upon which I put an express negative. This immediately follows from the observations of Rousseau. If the people or the individuals of whom the people is constituted cannot delegate their authority to a representative, neither can any individual delegate his authority to a majority, in an assembly of which he himself is a member. That must surely be a singular species of consent, the external indications of which are often to be found in an unremitting opposition in the first instance and compulsory subjection in the second. Again, very stilted language, but I think we got it. So moving on to chapter 3. I really enjoyed chapter 2. And I want to try to, I into it and like I could use it properly, but like the old-fashioned use of singular. It doesn't just mean like only. It means like pronounced or outstanding or prime example. Remarkable. That's what it says here. Exceptionally good or great, remarkable. Okay, that's the more old-fashioned use. And the Oxford gives an example, the singular beauty of the desert. Okay, so chapter 3 I didn't like at all. In fact, it was torture to get through. This is no offense to Michael Malice. He assembled who are considered the great anarchist thinkers. And unlike the prior chapter, which I really liked, I never heard of that guy. This one I have, and it's Max Steiner. This was torture to get through. This guy is a windbag. I know a lot of people are big fans. The chapter, it's one essay, and I didn't find it at all persuasive, and it goes for 21 pages on one topic, and just goes round and round and round. So let's read the introductory paragraph. So it's from The Ego and His Own in 1844. It says, somewhat of a hipster precursor to Nietzsche. You probably haven't heard of him. I have. Max Stirner's idiosyncratic book, Der Ansieg und sein Egatium. I know I mangled that. I was just taking a look at my email. I might need to put this on pause for a second. Was supposedly regarded as too crazy to bother censoring. It's just too boring. Stirner died largely forgotten, with the only images left of him being a couple of drawings by Marx's comrade-in-arms Friedrich Engels. His unique, that's one way to put it, energetic text later inspired egoists and anarchists alike, although not Nietzsche, who apparently never read him, with the opening salvo of "all things are nothing to me" being a cry of proud rebellion. Stirner's reduction, and it's a reduction all right, of purportedly morally binding concepts such as duty to mere spooks continues to resonate with anarchists today. Not this anarchist. And I'm going to just stop here for a moment, and I kind of need to anyway before delving into that chapter, which is just giving me PTSD to even think about it. Not going to be reading any more Stirner, I can tell you that. All right, and I just realized it's got my Miss Saigon shirt on, but I didn't have, if I'm going to do the Anarchist Handbook, I should at least have my anarchy symbol. Okay, we're diving into this thing. And again, it's just selected quotes, but I can summarize it. Basically, if it's right to me, it's right, and I'm going to play word games with the word right, meaning right or correct, and right as in something that you possess by virtue of being a human being, and it boils down to might versus right, and everybody has their own right, because it's their right. It is just a pretzel piece of nonsense. And if that's egoism, I don't want anything to do with it. But let's go on. It goes, whether I am in the right or not, there is no judge but myself. Others can judge only whether they endorse my right, and whether it exists as right for them too. You see the way he shifts between meanings of the word right, and he does this constantly. In consideration of right, the question is always asked, what gives me the right to it? Answer, God, love, reason, nature, humanity, etc. No, only your might, your power gives you the right. Your reason, therefore, excuse me, may give it to you. Now here, I'm going to read a long passage because it really distills it. I derive all right and all warrant from me. I am entitled to everything that I have in my power. I am entitled to overthrow Zeus, Jehovah, God, if I can. If I cannot, then these gods will always remain in the right and in power as against me. And what I do will be to fear their right and their power in impotent God-fearingness, to keep their commandments and believe I do right in everything that I do according to their right. My God. About as the Russian boundary sentinels think themselves rightfully entitled to shoot dead the suspicious persons who are escaping, since they murder by superior authority. How can you say murder? Aren't you making a judgment? If they had the power and ability to do it, wasn't it their right by your own logic? My God, with right. But I am entitled by myself to murder. I guess he answers my question. I forgot even, God, this is so. If I myself do not forbid it to myself, if I myself do not fear murder as a wrong. So murder can be right as long as you think it's right. Okay, Jan. This view of things lies at the foundation of Chamizo's poem Das Mortal, where the gray-haired Indian murderer compels reverence from the white man whose brethren he has murdered. The only thing I am not entitled to is what I do not do with a free cheer, that is, what I do not entitle myself to. I decide whether it is the right thing in me. There is no right outside of me. If it is right for me, it is right. Possibly this may not suffice to make it right for the rest. That is their care, not mine. Let them defend themselves. And if for the whole world something were not right, but it were right for me, that is, I wanted it, then I would ask nothing about the whole world. So everyone who does, who knows how to value himself. Everyone in the degree that he is an egoist, for might goes before right, and that with perfect right. I utterly repudiate this. He says, this is egoistic right. What is right for me, if it is right for me, therefore it is right. And he goes on and on and on. You'll see. The judge is lost when he ceases to be mechanical, when he is forsaken by the rules of evidence. Then he no longer has anything but an opinion like everyone else. And if he decides according to this opinion, his action is no longer an official action. As a judge, he must decide only according to the law. Commend me, rather, to the old French parliaments, which wanted to examine for themselves what was to be matters of right, and to register it only after their own approval. They at least judged according to a right of their own, and were not willing to give themselves up to be machines of the lawgiver, although, as judges they must, to be sure, become their own machines. States last only so long as there is a ruling will, and this ruling will is looked upon as tantamount to the own will. The Lord's will is law. What do your laws amount to if no one obeys them? What your orders if no one lets himself be ordered? The state cannot forbear the claim to determine the individual's will. To speculate and count on this, for the state it is indispensable that nobody have an own will. If one had, the state would have to exclude, lock up, banish, etc. this one. If all they had, they would do away with the state. The state is not thinkable without lordship and servitude, for the state must will to be the lord of all embraces, and this will is called the will of the state. That actually was a good paragraph. The own will of me is the state's destroyer. It is therefore branded by the state as self-will. Own will and the state are powers and deadly hostility, between which no eternal peace is possible. As long as the state asserts itself, it represents its own will, its ever hostile opponent, as unreasonable evil, and the latter lets itself be talked into believing this. Indeed, it really is such, for no more reason than this, that it still lets itself be talked into such belief. It has not yet come to itself. Have you tried not being pretentious? And to the consciousness of its dignity. Hence, it is still incomplete, still amenable to fine words. Let's see. I don't know if I highlighted much more because it just drones on. And it actually uses the phrase later. Listen, I don't judge people by modern standards, but I still put a little what the fuck next to it because he mentions the Jew question. What the actual what? I mean, he's a product of his time, so I'm not going to import today's morals into there, but that really, weirded me out. So I'm going to read one of his conclusions. Now, in conclusion, I have still to take back the halfway form of expression of which I was willing to make use, only so long as I was still, I like this expression, rooting among the entrails of right, and letting the word at least stand. But in fact, with the concept, the word too loses its meaning. What I called my right is no longer right at all, because right can be bestowed only by a spirit, be it the spirit of nature or that of the species of mankind, the spirit of God, or that of his holiness or his highness, etc. What I have without an entitling spirit, I have without right. I have it solely and alone through my power. It makes no sense. I do not demand any right, therefore I need not recognize any either. What I can get by force, I get by force, and what I do not get by force, I have no right to, nor do I give myself airs or consolation with my imprescriptible right. Imprescribable right. There we go. That's a mouthful. And I just breezed through 20-something pages with just a few select quotes, and you got pretty much the idea of what he said. Just rinse, wash, repeat times a million. So the next one we're going to be doing, not today, but what we're moving on to, and this is 4 pages. I like these shorter essays to get a taste for these thinkers, is Pierre-Joseph Proudhon. I've seen it spelled. I've never heard it pronounced. He's a mutualist. I'm sure I'll disagree, but at least it's compact, and I'll get what he's saying in a few pages. And after that, it is Herbert Spencer. And let's see how long that one is. This one looks longer. So it looks like it's going to be like the same thing. A shorter one. Well, it's not quite as long. It's about 10 pages maybe. But those are the next 2 we will be doing. I will be avoiding Stirner like the plague for the rest of my natural life. That was enough.